Okay. So welcome, everybody. It's so great to be with you, and thank you for coming to our fall 2024 lecture presented by the Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz Justice Institute. I'm Donna Berman. I'm the executive director of the Charter Oak Cultural Center, and I'm going to just say a few words about Charter Oak, and then about the Institute, and then I'll introduce our wonderful speakers. Charter Oak is a multicultural arts center doing the work of social justice through the arts. We do this in several ways by providing a free arts education to 1,000 students, soon to be 1,250, Hartford children through our City School of the Arts. And we offer educational and employment opportunities to people in the homeless community. And we present professional multicultural arts presentations, exhibits, and events from which no one is turned away for lack of funds. And we have lots of fun things coming up. You can go to our website, or you could sign up for our e-blast on October 18th in partnership with Agora Cultural Architects. We will be presenting Kiani in concert. On October 29th, Chef Rossi will be with us to discuss her new book, The Punk Rock Queen of the Jews. And on November 19th, you're invited to join us for our multicultural Kristallnacht commemoration. And then on November 21st, you're all invited to a lovely evening celebrating the final phase of our capital campaign with live music and great food and lots of surprises. And that's a free event. If you haven't already, we invite you to sign up for our e-blast. It's more than a listing of our events, which is interesting in and of itself, but there are different features in each edition to inspire, ignite your passion, and delight you. And if you'd like to support us, we would be most grateful. Last semester, for example, we had 375 kids on our City School of the Arts waiting list. Your support would help us offer the gift of the arts to more children, and every dollar counts. So thank you for whatever support you can give. And now we turn to the evening at hand. Part of our justice work at Charter Oak was the creation of the Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz Justice Institute in the fall of 2022 with the invaluable help of Dr. Tracy West and Dr. Francisco Pelaez-Diaz and Dean Edwin Aponte of Drew Theological Seminary School. Ada was my teacher, dissertation advisor, and friend. The method I developed for doing Jewish feminist theology in my dissertation has as one of its foundations Ada's thought. And to a large extent, she inspired the work we do at Charter Oak. We started the Institute to honor her memory and to create a place to showcase the work of contemporary Latinx women scholars and activists, many of whom were influenced by Ada. This is the 6th lecture we have offered as part of the Institute. Central to Ada's theological approach was the concept of lo cotidiano, the idea that the sacred is found in the fabric of the everyday lives of Latinx women. Grassroots Latinas was the phrase Ada used. I don't remember if I mentioned this before at prior lectures, but I just love it, and it bears repeating. I think I'm going to do it every time we have a lecture. I realized a while ago that Ada's initials spell out the word amid, which is so appropriate because Ada found God amid her community and the myriad ways that the community of Latinx women enters into la lucha, the struggle for justice. Ada always reminded me of a very short poem I read when I was a child. Here it is. I sought to hear the word of God and climbed the highest steeple, but God declared, go down again. I dwell among the people. So holding Ada in our hearts, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers for tonight. The Reverend Dr. Cristian de la Rosa received her PhD in theology and ethics from Chicago Theological Seminary, where her dissertation focused on contextual dynamics of power and agency. Her areas of interest and scholarship include Mujerista theology, cultural theory, Latin American liberation theology, and the Hispanic Latino community and its religious history. She is invested in social justice making, religious leadership formation, and bridge building between the academy, the church, and diverse communities. Dr. de la Rosa is a clergy member of the New England Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. She served as pastor of local congregations in Washington, D.C., and Dallas, and Lincoln, Nebraska. Before her appointment at Boston University, she served as Director of Continuing Education and Course of Study School at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary and with the Association of Hispanic Theological Education as the National Director for Tertulias Pastorales and Ecumenical Clergy Initiatives sponsored by the Lilly Foundation. She currently serves as the National Director for the Hispanic Youth Leadership Academy, consultant for the National Association of United Methodist Latina Clergy Women, and a United Methodist delegate from the National Council of Churches. Quite a resume. Also with us tonight is Claudia Alvarez Hurtado, PhD student at Princeton Theological Seminary in the Religion and Society program. Claudia is originally from Colombia, where she earned degrees in sociology and gender studies. She then moved to the US to work on her Master's of Divinity at Boston University School of Theology. There she worked alongside Dr. De La Rosa in initiatives like the Hispanic Youth Leadership Academy and Veces Latinas Student Association. Her research interest is the transnational movement of LGBTQ inclusive Pentecostal churches in Latin America. So please welcome these two wonderful, wonderful scholars, our wonderful speakers for tonight, Dr. Cristian de la Rosa and Claudia Alvarez Hurtado.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And I want to begin with words of appreciation for the members of the planning committee of this gathering. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you for the invitation to participate. I must say that it is an honor and a privilege, I consider it to be, that I do not take for granted to be part of this experience. I am honored to be part of this wonderful lecture series, particularly because it relates to Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz's work. My hope for today is that we explore the ways in which Latina women engage at the intersections of social, political, and religious systems in the country, the church and the academy in particular. In this presentation, I will provide some framing for the understanding and practice of Mujerista theology, share some about who I am as a contextual theologian, and point to some struggles and gifts of Latina women in the church and the academy. Also point to some references for understanding Mujerista theology and the processes that indeed we engage as pastoras and profesoras. I want to begin with words of gratitude for the life and work of our sister, Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz, who I consider to be a trailblazer. She helped me with the key points of reference during my studies, particularly my graduate degree, and then definitely key points of reference for my dissertation writing. In my faith journey in the academy and the church, I am always thankful for her theological contribution. She helped me to understand the question of how are you doing? People in the United States are always, how are you doing? So my typical answer at the beginning was, okay, fine, or fine, thank you. That's how you learn to respond when you're learning English. But after a while, particularly when I began my master's degree, my answer to the question, how are you doing, became aquí en la lucha, here always in the struggle. Because indeed it was a struggle to be in the academic settings beyond my undergraduate degree. And this answer indeed acquired new meaning when I began my degree at Wesley Theological Seminary and read Isasi-Diaz's book on Mujerista theology. Thanks to her academic work, I came to understand that my sense of being always in the struggle reflects my search for a way out of subordination as a Latina, Latin American immigrant women of Nahuatl origins that faces complex power dynamics, particularly in the US context. Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz was indeed a Hispanic theologian originally from Cuba, and she's best known for giving birth to the notion of a theology relevant and meaningful for Latinas struggling, particularly in the experiences of this country. I'm thankful to her and all the sisters who came before us, all trailblazers who intentionally carved out the frames for us to walk, the spaces for us to inhabit today, the conceptual spaces from where we find our voices and speak today. As we gather here tonight, we honor the work and ministry of women that came before us and recognize that in our struggles, they continue to be present. Indeed, en nuestras luchas se hacen presente. In our struggles, all these women that came before us, they are present today, tonight, as we gather here today in this place and space. The main proposal I would like for us to consider tonight is that Latina women leaders in the church and the academy embody within our physical bodies and through our practices, processes of transformation that identify, defend, and nurture life as we engage institutional power dynamics in partnership with our particular communities of origin, and sometimes in spite of our Christian institutions. There is for us as Latina women what I call a fragmented privilege. Fragmented privilege. It is a privilege that compels us to combine what we know already with contextual opportunities to facilitate transformation in spite of the ingrained institutional violence we encounter every single day in our religious and academic institutions. I believe that we begin to facilitate processes of transformation as our bodies enter any institutional physical space. Our physical bodies communicate the power of life despite the trauma of conquest and colonization of indigenous communities all over the Americans, all over this continent. We not only survived as descendants of the conquered, colonized, and raped indigenous women, but we continue to be and develop within the contextual isms, sexism, racism, classism, ageism, etc. of this country. I find it interesting that as Western scholars in the social disciplines try to articulate the current fragmentation of postmodernism and the potential of the third, what is called the third space in post-colonial theory, we as Latinas know that our ancestors already identified them and framed them long ago, after conquest and through the processes of colonization, as places, as spaces for us to survive. These places, spaces, third spaces, fragmentation are already identified from our ancestral knowledge as places and spaces for us to survive. We continue to experience to be within the fragmentation as means of survival, life, and meaning for individual and collective agency. Along these lines, in her book titled Decolonizing Methodologies, Research and Indigenous Peoples, Maori scholar Linda T. Smith makes a critical assertion about fragmentation and its relationship to the colonizing processes that we do well to consider within our own experiences as Latinas. She explains, and I quote, "Fragmentation is not a phenomenon of postmodernism, as many might claim. For indigenous peoples, fragmentation has been the consequence of imperialism. While the West might be experiencing fragmentation, the process of fragmentation known under the oldest guise of colonization is well known to indigenous peoples." End of quote. This clarification invites us to consider that the fragmentation of lands, cultures, and knowledge is trauma that we, mujeres Latinas, are recovering from through processes of recentering individual and collective identities and practices. As descendants of indigenous communities, Latinas in the United States are strategically located, and I will add called and ordained, to facilitate such recentering from within the collective traumas. In her contribution to a volume titled Feminist Intellectual Intercultural Theology, Latina's Exploration for a Just World, Cuban historian Daisy Machado notes the importance of the third space, an identified gap between power and knowledge that she notes that is very important to the work of Latinas and other racial ethnic historians, because it is filled with movement. It is alive, a place where life is negotiated by those who live on the margins. Machado draws from Gloria Anzaldua's borderland theorizing, particularly from the deployment of the Nahuatl term nepantla, meaning in between. I understand nepantla to be the space where we simultaneously experience who we used to be, who we are, and who we have the potential or need to become. Nepantla is a problematized in-between space and a state of being after traumatic events. One that I believe is a very familiar place and a state of being for Latinas, particularly those in United States, but also all over Latin America and the Caribbean. Those that work from within this place of Nepantla are nepantleras, strong women, mujeres who facilitate transformation in their own struggles for survival and systematic justice. Nepantleras embody fragmented realities. It is our inheritance from the conquest and colonizing processes. Considering the historically violent facts of the encounters of our indigenous ancestors with Western colonization and the experience of the complex intersectionalities of the isms in the United States, we as surviving Latinas cannot escape fragmentation. Our existence is a state of nepantla within spaces, places of fragmentation. And it doesn't matter how many degrees we acquire or how much we go up in the hierarchies of institutions, we continue to be nepantleras. Our ministerial and academic practices, when informed by our experience and relationship with our communities of origin, are rooted in this nepantla space state from where we identify platforms for our own constitution and practices. I claim these platforms as subversive places and spaces where we become facilitators of new spaces and places for the retrieval of indigenous resources, the reframing of knowledge, and the redirecting of power. I consider that wherever we stand and speak in relationship with academic or religious institutions, we appropriate subversive spaces facilitating at least three identifiable practices within our efforts. One is epistemological retrieval from our ancestors when we have the privilege to indeed dig into our own epistemologies. Two, the recontextualization of practices, when we find the resources and the support to indeed examine, evaluate, and redirect, and reformulate, and reframe practices. And third, the redirecting of subjugating powers and institutional violence. Indeed, places of privilege can be seen as negative as places, but privilege is only as good as it is the intent with which it is deployed. So places within institutions can help us indeed to redirect institutional violence. We are nepantleras, women that struggle for justice, identifying, claiming, and nurturing places and spaces for survival and the possibilities of new life for ourselves and our communities. We do not exist outside our communities. We are because our communities are. As descendants of indigenous communities for Latina women in the academy, the practice of epistemological retrieval remains a critical effort. And it begins with telling our own stories from within privileged spaces of fragmentation. I recognize that it is difficult to claim and appropriate institutional spaces framed by Latinas that came before us. However, it is possible to build on such spaces. There are many that walk before us, therefore we build on that. Seldom are such spaces given or reserved for us long-term. Institutional processes tend to unfold and further fragment whatever trailblazers from our communities took a lifetime to build, easy to destroy within the established systems. However, such institutional practices are due mainly to assumptions and perceptions rooted at the intersections of gender and race. There is a book titled Presumed Incompetent, The Intersections of Race and Class for Women in the Academia. I've told this story to many of my students, but after an Anglo female college mentioned it to me with great enthusiasm, I ordered it since I felt it was about the particular space I occupied in relation to this colleague and assumptions informing her about my identity and practices within academia. I have to say that I felt offended by the title and uncomfortable with the conversation since this particular colleague never talked to me before. This time she went on and on explaining how this book is about women of color in the academy and is so important for libraries to have it and for everyone to read it. Being new in the academy at that time, I went to my office, and even though I wasn't sure how to react, I made it a point to indeed order the book. And when I got the book, I particularly had this reaction because the box was heavy. It's a book of 507 pages. Maybe some of you have come across it. It's a volume. My reaction was not to open it and look at the table of content as I usually do with every book, but to feel its weight in my hand. And I literally went up and down with the book when I opened that box. I said to myself, oh, I am not only presuming competent, I am presumed to be very incompetent. I placed the book on my desk, telling myself enough academic violence for the day. These and many other contextual messages communicated to us through research, conversations, attitude of non-Latinx colleagues, and production of written material that labels us, describes us, etc., makes it difficult to be ourselves, to claim our spaces, and to identify our own contributions, particularities, and leadership styles. Statistical data and long list of limitations distract us from considering and living into who we are and who we are meant to become. However, I stand here tonight because, like my sisters, mothers, and grandmothers, we already embody the skills needed to manage fragmentation and borderland dwelling. We already have this amazing gift for the continuous nurturing and recreation of third spaces that become sources of creativity and possibilities for our own selves and our communities. It is my conclusion, out of my own experience as Latina clergy women in the United Methodist Church and faculty in several of our United Methodist related institutions, that the significance of our contribution to the church and the academy is our presence and engagement in the struggle for life in relationship with institutions. In theological language, we are God's grace to any institutions, God's grace when we are present. Nepantleras, those that struggle for justice in the borderlands, embody new life and relevance for higher education and ministerial practice within the institutional church and the academy. We represent and are indeed God's grace. I invite us to consider that Latina women stand neither at the margin nor at the center of institutional power. Rather, we exist and come into our own through life-giving processes of fragmentation, fluctuating between the church, the academy, and the community. We are gifted with the ability to function from the margins to the center and to any point in between through the gaps of fragmentation. Think about this one. We are gifted to indeed be and live and exist and make it in these spaces that no one wants to go into. So we are able to indeed move from and through the gaps of fragmentation. We are contextual facilitators of subversive spaces within the institutional borderlands. We create and facilitate the creation of places and spaces from where communities retrieve, contextualize, and generate meaning and relevance in the struggles for life and justice. At our best, we thrive through ongoing change as we become our own and find ways to communicate. In her article on Mujerista Theology, Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz systematizes the particularity of the experience of Latina women. She relays the struggle of God's calling and justice making in the definition of mujerista, and I quote, "A mujerista is one who struggles to liberate herself, who is consecrated by God as proclaimer of the hope of her people. Mujerista is one who knows how to be faithful to the task of making justice and peace flourish, who opts for God's cause and the law of love. In the Mujerista, God reivindicates the divine image and likeness of women. The Mujerista is called to gestate new women and men, strong people. Mujeristas are anointed by God as servants, prophets, and witness of redemption. Mujeristas will echo God's reconciling love. Their song will be a two-edged sword, and they will proclaim the gospel of liberation." End of quote. You see, a mujerista embodies the hope for a new reality of shalom, peace, and justice, with an option for el pueblo, definitely an option for el pueblo. She is consecrated by God, and in her facilitating of justice making, she engages in the bridge building for the birth of a new people. This is not only theorizing. I think here of Latina leading ministries and congregations in the context of the United States, in the inner cities, in little towns, in the middle of nowhere. And this is what they do in practice every single day. Most of us serve in relation to new immigrant communities at a time that human migration around the world is a pressing global issue. Current immigration policy in the United States, alongside growing racist attitudes, makes immigrant communities the most vulnerable. In response to the needs of new immigrant communities, pastoras minister in very complex situations, and they are so strong. They work with translation, orientation to a new culture, and social institutions, childcare, access to housing, everything. They organize programs as English as a second language programs, and and gather resources for basic needs of the community. Alongside preaching and leading of worship in local congregations, Latina pastors with many women in their congregations facilitate spaces for el pueblo. Local congregations become community centers for new immigrant communities. I will say that el caminar y la lucha de nuestras comunidades no es solo en teoría y pensamiento. A la luz de nuestras realidades, es una lucha y práctica de sobrevivencia que demanda nuevas estrategias y prácticas que problematiza en contextos académicos y religiosos. The walk and struggle of our communities is not only in theory and politically correct articulation. In light of our current political circumstances, it is a struggle for survival, demanding strategies and practices that problematize academic context and most institutionalized and in most institutional processes. So to conclude, Latina women do theology in practice and theory, not separate. And most of the time is first practice and then theory if there is time. But as mujeres, they remind me of the Canaanian women, la mujer cananea, la mujer Sirofenicia from Matthew 15, 21 and 28. These women indeed respond to Jesus. I hope you remember this text from the New Testament, but basically Jesus is saying no to these women that is asking for help. And she's called a dog. No matter how you interpret this text, it's so clear that Jesus is calling her a dog. But she responds very theologically and very practically with great wisdom and courage. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. So the doing of theology, indeed, by Latina women involves this engagement and gathering of courage from practice and then wisdom. I want to conclude indeed by remembering women that came before us, trailblazers, I call them, sembrando semillas de esperanza y justicia que muchas de nosotras ahora cosechamos. So I want to give thanks for all the women that came before us because they planted seeds of hope and justice that many of us are really working with today. Thank you. Thank you for this time.
Thank you, Dr. De La Rosa, for such a amount of wisdom in everything you shared. I don't want to go too long. I just want to be like a commentator of many of the points that Dr. De La Rosa already addressed. First, I want to say that Latina women in Theological Academy are trouble. We are a troubling presence, problematizing presence. Our bodies cannot but ask questions. And those questions are indeed subversive and a practice of resistance. However, many of us are not aware of that when we get into higher education and to Theological Academy. Until we meet people like Dr. De La Rosa, and until we read the wisdom of theologians as Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz. And I want to start saying that I want to share a moment that we had at one of our sessions of Hispanic Youth Leadership Academy, Jaila. And Dr. La Rosa invited one of her mentees. She has had many mentees throughout her life in the Theological Academy. She was an author, actually, very known right now by her books that are not like, they're deeply theological, but they are not like in the theological academic style. They're not written in that style. She speaks from her gut, and I feel that Dr. La Rosa was a great inspiration to unlock that gut wisdom in her, as she has made with all of us who have the privilege to be in her classes. And I just want to mention that when this author was talking in the room about how she was a troubling presence herself in her very conservative family, she thought that she was crazy because she wasn't in a validating environment. And when she met Dr. La Rosa, was the first time she was like, oh, actually, being who I am is okay. And Dr. La Rosa invited her to open a prayer in one of the spaces. I think it was from Jaila. And the author that I'm mentioning was very surprised for that invitation because she was like seen as la mala mujer, right, from her evangelical family. And when she was invited to pray, I remember very vividly, she said like, and I started saying, and this prayer is for las brujas. So like, that's not just an anecdote, right? It's the fact that Dr. La Rosa was the presence that enabled the wisdom of her radicality as a Latina woman talks a lot about the theological, epistemological, and political framework that informs Dr. De La Rosa's endeavors as a theologian and as a minister, as an educator. And for me, it's indeed a privilege to be here talking about this right now, because I think that none of us Latina women or queer people could be in such a place of fragmented privilege as academy and theological education, like in the doctoral level, if it wasn't because someone told us that we could make it. And if we didn't have people before us, that came before us, who were like these role models that told us, oh, we can actually make it. We can occupy those spaces, and not only occupy them, but nourish them. We wouldn't be here if there wasn't someone that said your voices matter, and they are actually amazing contributions to a field that has largely silenced women bodies and experiences as sources to know the sacred. And that's why, and I feel that sometimes when we talk about lo cotidiano, that is this category proposed by Maria Isasi-Diaz as locus theologicus, right, as the place where theology emerged. Sometimes we understand it as a merely descriptive category, but she is very emphatic in the fact that it's an epistemological framework. It's not, it's not a fixed category. Because sometimes the women that she talks about are women that even we don't identify that much with, or personally I don't, right? She talks about these hardworking, devoted women who are pious wives and mothers, and first I'm queer, right? And I don't have a husband and kids to feed. So you can believe like that's not my experience, right? But so in descriptive terms, you might feel like, well, those were a kind of women, right? But as an epistemological framework, that is more relatable. So it's like, oh, she's not talking about one fixed daily experience of Latina women, but she's open a space of saying everyday experience of every Latina woman is a legit source of theology. So there I enter into the story, and I understand that in my everyday life, in my interactions, in how my body occupies a space, and the information that comes from that is a source of theology. And there is where Mujerista theology links itself with the long history of liberation theologies that start from practice. It doesn't start, like liberation theologies don't start from engaging doctrines in a classroom or in the solitude of your monastery, right? But it starts with the bodily experience of people in the struggle. And something, so once again, as an epistemological framework, something that we gain from Madame Maria Isasi-Diaz, and that becomes, that unlock our own theological wisdom, is to know my experience is the first step for theologizing, right? My own experience of, let's say, one paper that I wrote for my class on Latinx theologies at Boston College, because I was at BU, but I could take classes there, was about the US, the movement of Latina women for reproductive justice in the US. So for me, the struggle for body autonomy and the right of women to decide over our bodies if we want to bear children or not, and of course, as a strong advocate for the abortion right, that was my paper, and the Maria Isasi-Diaz framework of understanding ourselves as people in the struggle, even if she didn't talk about bodily autonomy in those terms, is a framework that I could totally apply to say, like, this struggle for women to decide over their bodies and futures, and to claim their self-determination or their moral agency, That's the first step for theologizing. That's the source of our theological endeavor. And that is the source of the ways in which we understand the divine manifesting through through this struggle, but through our daily experiences of these women in this particular fight, but it could be any. Yeah, I don't want to extend myself too much. I just wanted to make emphasis on Lo Cotidiano as an epistemological framework that elevates our experiences to theological sources, and how that doesn't sit with you until someone like Dr. De La Rosa in my life creates that bridge, and not only within the academy but within the church. I grew up Catholic and left the church when I was 16, because you realized that you start questioning everything as a teenager. So I left the church, and when I moved to the US to get my MDiv, it was because I was starting to get involved with the Catholic Women for the Right to Choose movement that is in several parts of Latin America. So they use feminist theology to advocate for women's rights to decide over their bodies. That's why I enrolled in the MDiv, to gain more tools for queer theologies and feminist theologies. And then I started to join Dr. De La Rosa's church, and it was the first time I saw women preaching, like the first time, in a church that had a rainbow flag in front of it. And this woman she was Mexican, and she was talking about how the Canaanite woman was interrogating Jesus to extend God's grace. She claimed it. She made that claim. And then for me, that was so powerful. And it didn't happen in the classroom, but it happened in a brown female non-white body occupying the pulpit. And that unlocked my own theological imagination and my own understanding of the church. And I realized I don't only have a space here, but these spaces need us to foster theological imagination and to expand the ways in which the divine inhabit the world, right? So anyways, I don't want to go too far, but because I also would like to hear from you. But I just want to say how grateful I am for having Dr. La Rosa as my mentor, as someone who is indeed so committed to making mostly international students aware of the effects of colonization in their territories, of borders violently imposed, of the acculturation of their societies, and how when we connect with those ancestors, with those lost memories, we unlock the subversive memories that we hold in our own bodies, and how they are the lenses through which we enter theological education. And that's powerful and transformative and liberating and deeply healing, because you start connecting those fragments that live within you. So I feel grateful and honored to be a mentor, even if I'm not there in Boston anymore, to be a mentee, sorry, of Dr. La Rosa. Even if I'm not there in Boston, she's my great inspiration. Like it's there, like it's going to be always a lighthouse. I'm going to look to gain wisdom, and this has to do with Isasi-Diaz as well, right? Like Dr. Rosa embodies the proposal that Isasi-Diaz like trigger for all the voices of Latina women within Theological Academy. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I feel so touched by your presentations. It's so moving, and I just feel out of smiling and just being so happy to know of your work. It's just really, thank you so much for tonight and for the work that you do in the world. We're going to open it up for questions now. Anybody want to ask anything or make a comment?
Well, I just want to thank Dr. De La Rosa and Claudia too for sharing your experience. And I guess for me, what I struggle with is what you were mentioning about we're in this privileged space. So I think about Edward Said and Occidentalism, and he was in the privileged space, and from there he recognized that he can infiltrate, for lack of better words. But sometimes I feel that because I'm so in this space, sometimes it's so detached from the grassroots. And so sometimes my accountability and my responsibility, how I share my story, and hopefully not let it seem like, oh, this is what I don't want to speak for all Latinas, but sometimes I catch myself always being extra cautious and then perhaps not deciding not to share. So I just wonder if you struggle with that, whether it's Claudia or Dr. La Rosa, and how you navigate that.
Let me respond briefly. When I talk about privileged space, our privileged fragmented space is very different than privileged space in the academy. I think I always parallel these two privileged spaces in my own space, for example, at Boston University, the United Methodist Church. I mean, we are in a privileged space from a Western perspective because of our titles, because of our positions, because of our formation. And that's one that I appreciate, and I build, I use it as a way of, as a platform, as I mentioned, as a platform to redeploy or to redirect. But then I don't really place a lot of emphasis on it because I know that it's not for me. I'm there kind of holding the space for a little while. So what I talk about in terms, what is powerful for me and nurtures my being and really facilitates the justice making that I engage in and the relationships is this privileged, fragmented space. Nobody that is in a privileged academic space will enter. So that's my own space. And I think that's the place that we as people of color, as descendants of the colonized, particularly women, can really work with, because it becomes like a refuge within any institution. And it's the fragmentation is such, in this complicated, very difficult, complex world, the fragmentation is so much that we are able, or I see myself kind of like fluctuating between all different these fragments and these spaces. So that's what I'm talking about, and that's how I manage it to be able to identify the privileged space from a Western perspective that for me tends to be very superficial and not very, is privileged in the sense that I access resources, I access, skills, or I access, some support. But really the one that I value and I work with is the privileged fragmented spaces that my body inhabits. And that it fluctuates everywhere. I hope I'm making sense to you.
No, thank you for that clarification. It really
imaginary. It's really, when you think of a creative, it's an imaginary, but it's within power dynamics. And I don't know if you come across Judy Butler, but she talks about these cycles where, at the beginning and end of every cycle, there is a gap, and that's the fragment, and that's the opportunity to redirect and shift. So.
Well, I don't have an elaborate question, sorry, answer. I think, oh, you have to go. Should I still answer? Or no?
I'm so sorry. I just at 7:30 I have another Zoom. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. That's okay. Do you want me to answer? Like from my point of view? Okay. Good to see you anyways, Kenya. Well, in my case, I feel I have very practical answers in the way I do it. And I don't do it only, I don't engage in these practices only for coherence, but because there are strategies of survival. Like I do it because I need it. So, for example, I think it has to do with what led me to theological education. Like I was sure about my convictions, and I was sure about how mine my body is. I didn't need a religious informed narrative that made my decisions more legitimate to me. But I knew that many women in my country did need that, including my mom. So I feel that my first decision to engage with real women experience, not only the privileged ones that maybe have already deconstructed themselves thanks to the most secularizing institutions or movements, was to talk their own religious language and to give it validity. And that's the origin of my deep commitment with the church, because that's a central space for socialization and community building for the people I care about. So I took seriously the religious language, and I learned to talk about it, and I learned to love it, and I learned to use it by myself, to myself. And I that's a big bridge with that community of concern. So for example, here I just moved to New Jersey, and the church I'm going is a Latino church. I'm Methodist, but there are no Latino churches, so it's an Episcopal church. And like my answer to this question, I don't know in terms of concepts, but it's just I go there and I get to pray with other Latina women who take their concerns, worries, and joys before God. And we are there together, and we are one same body, literally. But I don't do this to be too coherent. I do it because I need it. My soul needs it. So yeah, and like I'm the communities that I care about are not only like the Latina women here in the US, but Latin American communities. And when I was working with Hyla, thanks to Dr. La Rosa trust and encouragement, I organized with a friend pastor, a gathering of LGBTQ inclusive churches from Latin America, and we met in Bogota. That was last year. So it's like, I'm here, a place where there are resources, but the struggles I care about mostly are in Latin America. So let's bridge it, right? Like something like that. So anyway, very practical stances I've taken, and that's a commitment I hold into my own academy, understanding.
Thank you so much for those thoughtful answers. Does anyone else have a question or a comment? By the way, I want to mention to you that Dr. West has been just so vital to this whole initiative. And she actually suggested that Dr. De La Rosa would be a speaker for us tonight. And I'm just so grateful. You were so right. And it's just really, this has just been just a marvelous night. Dr. West, did you want to say something?
Well, yes, thank you. Thank you very much, because you are the person that makes this happen, all of the details and arrangements, and just making sure that it happens. And there's so many ways in which we could be a better partner to you, but you persevere. So I'm so grateful. I also want to say to both you, Dr. De La Rosa, and also to you, Claudia. This was so really meaningful and provocative, and there's just so many ways that I would love to engage it. But I, like Donna, I worked with Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz as my colleague in teaching ethics for many years, and so and we work quite closely. And so just to see the ways in which you were building on her work, it's just there's something about it, right, Donna? You just know it would be so meaningful to Ada Maria. I can't overstate how much it honors who she was and what she wanted for her work. So it's really, really stunning for those of us who knew Ada and worked with her. But I guess I want to, I don't know, I love this idea of epistemological retrieval. And I just keep going, I just keep thinking about it. And I also keep thinking about you, Claudia, the way in which body and embody is, so that's just something that really matters to me in work and things that I like to think about as well. There's something about how you have a process that's collective that I'm wanting to think about, because it's one thing if you are like on an individual journey to tell your own story, to witness to the kind of sort of intellectual concepts that are linked to your own experiences. And so that's one kind of project, but a collective Mujerista project, in some ways, you have to confront difference. So I like to think a lot about race, for example. And so what does it mean to interpret, to be in dialogue when there is not just difference, but ways in which you have conflicting understandings. And so when you're retrieving, you have to do this kind of translation for yourself, and you have to confront, right, the ways in which you differ and you conflict with one another. And so how, as well as a movement work, is so much about trying to confront those kinds of differences. So I don't know. So I was just thinking what one knows as an individual, what we know collectively, that is tough. I think sometimes to grasp, to create a process that has the space for the ways in which Black, Latina, Latinx identity has certain kinds of epistemological knowledge, sort of trajectories and narratives that are so different. You know what I'm trying to get at? And so how does that happen in a way that's collective and has the space for like conflicting differences?
I mean, I would say that it is a collective, because we epistemological retrieval has to do with similar experiences. We're all descendants of the colonized, one way or another, and in one shape or form. And so that itself makes us community, regardless of ethnic group, regardless of gender, in most of the most communities in the world. So that in itself makes it a collective project. And then for all women, I mean, all women, there's something about the understanding of the precious gift of life. I believe, as I always talk about being co-creators of life with God. So that in itself also makes it collective. And so we keep not only giving life, but we keep nourishing life. We keep struggling to make sure that life continues. So that is a collective effort. It's just not individual, and it's not for one particular community. It's really comunidad. It's the whole community. So this whole thing of individual projects and individuality is so anti, like, life-giving, anti-life-giving. So So that's where I also see the beauty of this calling of community for us. Mhm.
Well, I'll try to make justice to the question because it's very, very deep. I'm problematizing in a good way. I feel that, and the other day I was thinking, why always I answer, I feel that, I feel that. I never say, I think. I always say, I feel. So funny. It's like I feel that my process thinking starts from intuitions that I have, and then I read, and then I elaborate thinking to say like, oh, okay, so that's what I was feeling, and then I made it theory or more systematic thought. Anyways, so I feel that something that Dr. La Rosa taught me by doing was the power of community. So we knew a view that wherever she was, we all were going to be, right? And like every opportunity, even if it was of every opportunity to gather, even if it was like a moment of sorrow because we had hard times that some members of our communities had to deal with, or for celebration, like everything was a moment to honor life and to honor to honor what makes us a community, that is basically people that care for each other, and that know that are struggling together. So it's, yeah, like that's a legacy that I feel that anyone that gets to be around Dr. De La Rosa carries with them. And that means that as soon as I got here to my new school, I was like, where are the Latinos? Let's get together, you know? And that is not just like, oh, let's have fun. Like, yeah, but it's more than that, right? It's what happens when you get together and speak your language and eat your food and listen and dance your music. So I don't know if that responds the answer in any capacity, but we don't even have to be intentional with thinking in our broader community. Not like some, for example, white students that have taken classes with Dr. De La Rosa that are like, but who are my ancestors? Like I cannot trace a pre-colonial, pre-Christian past. Like we don't have to make that effort. We know that we know that we are us, right? And if for people that come from Latin America, I think that it's even, some things are even stronger because we come here to these places to this privileged society when even people who are under the line of poverty have more access to care and food than people in our country. We come here and we experience like a cognitive dissonance. It's like, where are we? Like in our countries, like here sometimes, like in our countries, people are being disappeared every day for political repression. And we carry that with ourselves. Actually, the struggle is to stop thinking about it sometimes, right? So it's like, I don't know how to explain it, but like the collective is inevitably inhabiting us all the time. So yeah, anyways, that's my answer.
Thank you. No, beautiful, beautiful illustrations of the ways in which collectivity is so palpable in the different ways that you have given expression to. And I love the dynamism, which is so evident also in the ways in which you were talking, which leaves, that's what I love about your work, Dr. De La Rosa, is this sense of developing and growing, and there isn't like one way to be mujerista. That you kind of have to fit yourself into this little box. So even as you're talking about the we, that it's a broad there's breadth to it. So thank you. I'm appreciative, enormously appreciative of that vision.
Thank you for that. You know, it's something that I found really powerful too, and I think it's related to what you're saying, Dr. West, is this whole idea of fragmentation, which we normally think of in such a negative way, as being actually the place of possibility. And, you know, you specifically talked, Dr. De La Rosa, about the kind of fragmentation that comes about as a result of trauma. And still, it's a place of possibility. I thought that was really, I'm going to chew on that for a long time. And that's part of the expansiveness, I think, of your thought and your approach to life. And thank you for that. Well, this has been a really marvelous night. I cannot thank you enough. This was such a gift to us. Thank you both, Dr. De La Rosa. Thank you, Claudia. It was just marvelous. And I want you to come back. And I don't want to say goodnight because I don't want to leave you. I want to continue to bathe in your wisdom and your warmth. Thank you very, very much. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. And please check out our website, maybe join our mailing list so that you can see other lectures from the Ada Maria Isasi-Diaz Justice Institute that we will be presenting. So thank you. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Blessings to you.
Thank you. Blessings
you.
to everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
It was great.
It was great. Really.
It was great.
And you remembered to record it.
Yes. With your help. I think I had to go out because my dog had to go to the bathroom. I think she has to go again.
Okay. Take care.
Tracy,
Bye. Good
you
night.
remember Jenny? You remember Jenny, right? This is Jenny.
Hi, Jenny. I'm not sure I remember Jenny.
Jenny
Yes.
was my partner when I was at Drew.
Oh, your partner, Jenny. Okay. I mean, I wasn't sure which Jenny we were talking about. Yes.
Jenny.
Yes, your partner, Jenny. Hello.
Hi. So my honorary doctorate from Drew as Donna's partner during the time she was getting her stuff.
Yes.
It's so wonderful to see you. What a lovely program. And I know that you played such a huge role in getting this moving and off the ground. So it's just really lovely to see you and to hear you speak, and just wonderful.
Yeah,
wonderful.
you're amazing.
It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Good to see you,
Take good care. Be well.
Be well.
More soon, okay?
Be well. Okay, we'll stay in touch. Okay. Bye-bye.
Lots of love. Thank you.
Lots of love.